The most time-consuming part of 3D modeling in Blender is just making selections. It's something that we have to do before we run any operation in Blender, and if you're doing that all manually, that can be really slow and really inefficient. Now, Blender does have a really cool set of tools to make selections easier, but a lot of people don't know about the majority of these tools. A lot of them are hidden away behind weird shortcuts and submenus, and tutorial makers tend not to talk about them very often, so most people don't even know they exist. So I thought today I would just go through basically everything I know about making selections in Blender. Let's just jump in and cover the really basic stuff first. So Blender has 4 different default modes for selection. The first one is just box select, which works kind of like selecting something in the file menu in Windows. You can just click on something to select it. You can hold down Shift to select multiple items, or you can drag a box and anything in the box will get selected. If you draw another box, then it will change the selection. Pretty simple stuff, right? But if we jump into edit mode here and we press the W key, instead of box select, what we'll get is this cursor. We can change the radius up here, and anywhere we draw with the cursor, it will draw a selection. Now you can see here that every time I draw one, it's getting rid of the old selection. Up the top here, we can actually change that. All of the selection modes have multiple options where you can make it additive or you can make it subtract, for instance. And I think this is a really handy mode. If you're in just the regular box select and you want to access that quickly, you can just press C and you can scroll with the mouse wheel in this mode and you can get all those selections straight away. I use this a lot for selecting and I think it's really handy. Now if we go into the next mode, that's the lasso mode. Basically with lasso, all it does is you draw a selection. Oh, need to switch that to the original mode. Draw a selection. Anything inside the selection will be selected. There's a few different modes for this, like it can do an inverse of the selection. So anything not selected will now be selected. That one can also come in quite handy sometimes. Finally, if we press W one more time, there's this mode, which is kind of like box select, but it'll only allow you to select one thing at a time, which can be sometimes handy, I suppose, for precision. It's not something I ever really use. If we hold down Alt and we click on an edge, it'll select the whole loop, and that works with faces too. If we select between 2 faces, we can select them. We can hold Alt and Shift and we can select multiples. Now, one thing that's really handy here is if we have an edge or a face selected, like let's say this one, and we want to make a continuous line, if you hold down Control, it will take the shortest path. So one thing that's really handy for is, let's say you're trying to do a UV unwrap and you're selecting the edges, like let's say around this ear, you can just select an edge, find the point where you want the flow to continue to, press Control, and then press it a few more times, and you can cut around that shape. Another operation that tool can do, which is really handy, is let's say we've got this one selected and we want to jump to here. By default, it goes down the right hand side because it's a shorter distance, right? This side is slightly shorter than this side. But if we want it to follow the least amount of geometry, we can turn on a topology distance, and now it'll switch to this side because this is just 1, 2, 3, 4 faces, and this is a lot more. We can also do a deselect. So if you want to select every other edge between that path, you can do that too. There's another similar tool in here. If we select this face over here and we press Control and Shift, then we click on another face, it will fill in a box between those places. So that can be a really fast way to select a lot of geometry at once. Another one that's really handy is you can select every edge around a loop. So let's say I want to select all of the edges on this cube. Instead of doing them one at a time, if I hold down Control and Alt, then I click one of them, it'll select them all. Now that can be really handy when you're trying to like bevel edges on a box or something like that. I use that one continually. The only thing is, if you have multiple edges, it will select everything around the loop. It won't just select the corners, it selects anything all the way around this edge loop. Okay, so moving on from there, we can select things by type. If you press Shift and G, you will get this select group method. So let's say we want to get rid of all of the lights in the scene. right? Which is something I do quite often. I'll get all the lights and I'll put them into one group. If you just press Shift, and G, and then go by type, I'll select all of the other lights. Same thing over here. If we get the cube, it'll collect all of the actual meshes in the scene. And if you had curves, it would do curves or whatever. And if you look at this, you can see it's got quite a lot of different things. For instance, you can select an object that has children, and you can get only the children. So if you've got a model of a desk, and you want to select all of the objects on the desk and move them a little bit to the left, you can just click on the desk and then pick the children. I'll get all the children. It works for all sorts of stuff. Even things like materials. If you have an object and it's got faces with a blue material, but some of the faces you assign a, red material, let's say. Assign that. If we select this red face and then Shift G and material, I'll select all of those faces that have the red material. Another thing that this can be really handy for is selecting things that are in alignment with each other. Let's say we have an object like this and we want to select this top row of faces. If we go Shift G, we can say by normal, and that'll select anything with the normals pointing up. But what you can see here is it's also selected these top ones because the normals of these point in the same direction. They're all facing up. If you want only this loop around here, then what you would do is go coplanar, and that would select just the ones that are on the exact same level and are all connected. And you can do that for several other things too. Like if you want all of the faces that are the exact same size as this face, and you can go Shift G and by area, and it's selected all four of these on the top because they're the only faces on this object. Obviously, and the ones on the bottom actually here as well. They're the only faces on this object that are exactly the same size as this. And then if you wanted to expand that selection, you can just increase the influence, and eventually it'll start selecting the larger faces. A lot of times in Blender, you're trying to select or deselect things in a repeating pattern. And a really good tool for that is called Checker Deselect. If I just select all of the faces on this mesh and go select, Checker Deselect, you can see that we get this kind of checkerboard pattern where it'll select every other box basically. Every other part of the plane, all the faces get selected. Now we can make changes to this if we just increase the count to say 3. Then what we'll now notice is that you have basically 3 faces in between each one of these, right? So it's 1, miss 3, 1, miss 3. What about if you wanted like a gap of 3 and then you wanted 2 selected? Well, then you just change the selected number. If you put it up to 2, then you'll now have gap of 3 and then 2, gap of 3 and then 2. You can change the offset as well to decide where that starts. Often when I'm modeling something in Blender, I'll want to like skip a certain amount of edges around a cylinder or something like that. So if I just add a cylinder in here and I go in X-ray or wireframe mode, select all these, I can just go select, Checker Deselect, and that'll give me every other one. And if I want every 5th edge or 4th edge or whatever, then that's nice and easy. That's a very cool way to make things like this, like cogs and stuff. Use that constantly. That's a really great one. In the outliner, you can right click on any collection and just select all of the objects in that collection. If you have a character that has multiple parts and it has an armature that's all parented to, you can also select the armature, right click on that and go select hierarchy, and it'll give you every single part of the character. Now, whenever you have a selection in Blender, like say if we select some random faces here and here, if you decide that actually you need the selection to be bigger, you can just press Ctrl and plus, and that will grow the selection by 1 each time. And if you press minus, it'll do the opposite until nothing else is selected. So the final selection method that I want to talk about is selecting by linked. A lot of the times the objects that you want to select will have some sort of linked properties. For instance, a few of the objects in this scene are instances, right? They're instance duplicates, which means they all share the same data, and any change you make to one will make will be repeated on the other. So if I go Shift L and then Object Data, that will select every one of those objects for me. If I want to select all of the objects with the same material, for instance this blue material, and go Shift L and select this material, and every object that has this material stored on it, even this one which has the red and the blue, they'll all get selected. So that in a nutshell, guys, is everything I know about selecting stuff in Blender. Well, it's probably not. I imagine I've forgot a few. If I have, I'll leave a pinned comment or something with everything I've forgot about. If you thought of any selection methods that I've mentioned here, let me know about it in the comments. I would love to see them. Hope you're doing well, guys. Have a good day.